Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub, and if you were asked, what's the best city in the Middle East in terms of industry and culture and all the aspects of a world-class city, what would you answer? Cairo? Istanbul? Amman? Dubai? Well, according to a survey conducted by the London-based Time Out magazine, the best city in the entire Middle East is Tel Aviv. And just think of it. Tel Aviv is high-tech. It's fashion and culture, theater, museums. When people think of Tel Aviv, they think of a modern Western city with beautiful beaches, hotels up and down the boardwalk. They think restaurants and discos, Dizengoff Square, and then exciting nightlife. In fact, Tel Aviv is known as the party city of the Middle East. And there's one more facet of Tel Aviv. It's known for its vibrant LGBT community, which comprises 15 to 20% of the Tel Aviv population. And Tel Aviv is most well known for its annual Gay Pride Parade, which has more than 200,000 participants. American Airlines calls Tel Aviv the best gay city in the world. And it is one of the most popular destinations for LGBT tourists. Israel is known for its inclusion of the LGBT community in a sea of Arab countries which persecutes and sometimes executes those identified as being LGBT. But this doesn't mean that the LGBT community of Israel is problem-free. There are issues which remain troubling to Israel's LGBT community, and they are issues being raised in the public discourse of Israeli society. And there are those in the world Jewish community, especially among the more ultra-Orthodox, who do not believe an LGBT lifestyle should be treated the same way as a straight lifestyle. Well, what is LGBT life really like in Israel? Is it being romanticized? Or is Israel a real model of a society that embraces LGBT? And if there are problems for the LGBT community in Israel, what are they? And how are they being addressed? For some answers, I am so pleased to be joined by Tyler Gregory, known to his friends as Ty, who serves as executive secretary of an LGBTQ organization called A Wider Bridge, which seeks to advance equality for the gay community of Israel. Tyler Gregory is an American Jew from San Diego, California, a graduate of the University of California, and prior to his joining A Wider Bridge, Tyler Gregory spent several years working for Apec. It is a joy having you at this table. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So first, let's talk a little bit about you and then the issues confronting the community in Israel. So you're from San Diego, California. And what kind of Jewish home do you grow up in?
Grew up in a large Reformed community, the biggest Reformed synagogue down there.
Named?
It's called Beth Israel.
Beth Israel.
La Jolla, California. Amazing community.
And siblings?
Younger sister, she's 27. She's back in San Diego these days. And I'm very jealous with the schwitzy weather we have over here of the nice 70s they get all the time.
Good for them.
Yeah.
Good for her and good for them. Your mother and father, involved in Jewish life or what?
Very much so. You know, it's a family tradition, Jewish life, Zionism.
It was.
It runs through my veins.
That's lovely. So you grew up in a Zionist home.
100%.
And you're hearing about Israel from the time you're a child.
Absolutely.
When's the first time you go to Israel?
I went when I was 16 with Nifty.
Yes.
It was a Lador Vador trip, first visiting Central Europe and Israel. And I always knew that there was something more to being Jewish than religion, but it wasn't until I got there and saw that I could live as a Jew in a Jewish society that it truly clicked for me that this was an important part of my Jewish identity. And that set me off on the journey from fighting BDS on campus to Apec to a wider bridge. So it's really been a central theme in my Jewish journey.
That's a lovely journey. When you were growing up in a Reformed Jewish household, in a Reformed Jewish congregation, what was your Jewish education like? Did you go to Hebrew school? Where were you?
I did the whole Hebrew school thing. I did the bar mitzvah, the confirmation process. It was great. I think that in terms of Israel, it's really tough to talk about the richness of the culture from a stale classroom in the basement of the synagogue.
Yes.
It's something entirely different to be there. And so while I enjoyed that, I think that you just have an altogether different experience on the ground. And for me, that was transformative.
Mm-hmm. Do you have warm memories about your bar mitzvah ceremony?
I do. And fun fact, I donated the proceeds to the San Diego Turtle and Tortoise Society. Go figure.
I understand. And do you have warm feelings about Hebrew school?
I do. I think it's critically important. I think it's part of our tradition, and someday I'm sure I'll send my kids to Hebrew school.
Well, you're the first person to say it, but good for you. What about Passover? Warm feelings about Passover?
Love Passover.
What was that like in your home?
We'd trade off between different parts of our family, but for me, I remember all the songs, singing all the songs, Let My People Go. My mom would always get the little plastic figurines of the different 10 plagues. It was a great experience.
Terrific. And what about in college? Where'd you go?
UC Davis.
UC Davis. What was the Jewish atmosphere there like?
It was great. I joined AEPI, the Jewish fraternity, became the chapter president as a senior, and we were sort of at the forefront of Israel advocacy on campus, Northern California school. Unsurprisingly, a lot of BDS fights.
There were?
Yes, absolutely.
What was that like?
It was incredibly difficult, especially as an LGBT person, to see a lot of my peers support this BDS movement and cause so much division on campus.
So let's stop for a moment.
Yeah.
When you're in college, you're already part of the LGBT community.
I came out during college, yes.
Okay. May I ask, by the way, as you look back at your own life, at what point in your own journey, personal journey, do you have a sense that you're gay?
Well, I think you'll hear this from a lot of people. I figured it out at Jewish summer camp. I think that's where people really grow up outside of the classroom.
Yes.
And that was sort of maybe when I was 14, that's when I had my gay awakening, if you will.
Okay. And am I correct that you realize that there's something about you that is as attracted to men or boys as a young person your age would be to girls if they were straight?
I didn't figure that out until college, and I think it's because we don't have the right curriculum for young people to learn about different identities.
Oh, this is very important, Ty. Explain to me, if you couldn't have articulated it the way I just did when you were in camp, what would you have said? What even gave you a clue? And then how do you transition so that you can articulate it in college?
I think that it's about norms. And when you grow up reading stories and seeing movies and hearing about friends in straight relationships, that becomes the norm. And so when you are visible, when your stories are visible, whether it's in a curriculum or media, you see yourself as part of the norm. And things have changed a lot since I was a teenager, and we've made milestones both in our public education system, in the media, in Hollywood. But because I didn't see those norms, it took me a long time from sort of this awakening moment to really fully accepting myself, because it wasn't in my day-to-day life. And we still have a long way to go. In liberal, reform places like San Diego, I think we've made a lot of progress. But if you look at the middle of our country, or frankly outside of Tel Aviv, this fabulous city that you were talking about, we still have a lot of work to do.
Mm-hmm. Was it scary for you as a child?
No. I had a warm family, very accepting.
I'm talking about self-perception. Because what I hear you saying is that although you knew something was going on, it was so different than the expected in the world around you that you had to feel something. And I wonder if it wasn't scary, was it uncomfortable in some way? Did it cause problems for you inside you?
You know, I think that I understood that there was a difference happening inside myself, but as a very outgoing, sociable person, I found a way to work around it. And I think that's why it took me so long to go through the processing of coming to terms with myself, as I found ways to be distracted by getting involved with social clubs, AEPI, in college. You know, I always found a way to keep myself busy and entertained, and I think that led to maybe pushing it off.
Okay.
But I was very lucky. My family's very accepting.
Yes, how did they react?
Positively. You know, when I sat my dad down, he thought that I was going to tell him I had a horrible disease. He's like, "That's it? Okay." So I think that...
and your mother?
Same. I think deep down she always knew but didn't put the pieces together.
And your sister?
Same. Everyone's very
your
supportive.
Your grandparents?
Equally supportive.
So you were very lucky.
Incredibly
it's
lucky.
not always that way.
Not the norm, necessarily.
Well, I'm very, very happy for you.
Thank you.
Okay. So that's your personal journey, and you go to Israel for the first time with Nifty.
Yep.
And you fall in love with Israel?
Yep, absolutely.
Your second time, when is that?
Second time I went with my dad in college. We did a road trip, you know, up and down the entire place.
Just the two of you?
Just the two of us, yeah.
Oh, how lovely.
It was nice. We had a good time.
Yes. Okay. And then, at what point do you become at home in Israel?
At what point does it feel like a home?
Yes.
It felt like a home the first time I was there. And so many Israelis, when they knew I was visiting for the first time, would say, "Welcome home." I said, never been here. What's that about? But there is a sense of belonging of this international Jewish people, and it's such a warm feeling to be there.
How did you end up working for Apec?
Well, I graduated in the rut of the Great Recession, and I needed a job. And the CEO of AEPI, Andy Borans, helped me with a letter of recommendation, and I got a job in San Francisco with APEC out of school.
What were you doing?
What was I doing for APEC? I started at the bottom as an admin, answering the phones, logging gifts for fundraising, and eventually worked my way up to working in the political department, engaging progressive members of Congress in the Pacific Northwest with the legislative agenda. And it's a big challenge out there.
It is. Was it fun, though?
Oh, it's super fun.
It was super fun.
Yeah, I would describe it as a campaign that never ends. If you like campaigns, it's great, but it can get exhausting. You know, there's always going to be an issue to move the agenda forward.
You know, there are many Jews who look at AIPAC and think it's a very right-wing organization. What would you say to them?
I would say they're only looking at half of the organization. It's a bipartisan organization. It can't succeed with bipartisanship. And we are in the most polarized era of my lifetime, and that prevents people from understanding that value. But the Jewish people aren't a partisan issue, and neither is the state of Israel. We need to make sure whatever Congress, whatever president we have, that they are supportive of the U.S.-Israel relationship. And that can be a difficult conversation to navigate when the policies of, say, the Trump administration are triggering for Latinos, for LGBT Americans. To have that conversation about bipartisanship on this issue, it's something foreign to people today. And we really have to remind them that our lives are at stake if we don't keep this a bipartisan issue.
So how do you become involved with A Wider Bridge?
So I met the founder while I was still at APAC. The head of the office at APAC said, "You're gay, go find people in San Francisco to get involved." So I'd go to the Castro, the gay district in San Francisco, and socialize, do some networking at events, and I found that things were falling flat with them, that they weren't interested, they weren't engaging with the issues that I cared about as someone who cares about Israel. And I sort of did some soul searching. Why is this that my community is not embracing this cause? And I found our founder, Arthur Slepian, who started the organization in 2010, and thought he had a really compelling product to do Israel engagement differently. And it's based on personal relationships rather than political relationships. And what I would boil it down to is, when you are fighting for your rights, you don't have the ability to focus on foreign policy issues, whether it's Iran, security cooperation, the things that we think about. That is not where progressive communities under fire today are. And so we need to find a different way to have this conversation with progressive communities, because the security conversation is just a totally foreign topic for most people.
Are you saying, by the way, that when you became involved with the Wider Bridge, one of your concerns was, how does the larger LGBT community relate to Israel, and why is the LGBT community willing to join with the BDS movement when everybody understands that Israel is the only place in the Middle East. And it's not, people say, why do we want to compare Israel to Syria? That's stupid. But it's not just to Syria. Israel, when it comes to certain aspects, and I want you to go into this, but in the larger sense, Israel's among the Western leaders in the way it treats the LGBT community. Why is it, do you think, that those in the larger community, whether it's intersectionality or whatever it is, say, you know what, I want to align with those who are not only bash Israel. The BDS movement, their ultimate goal is the destruction, the end of the state of Israel. You've now been inside. Explain to us what you find the thinking is, and why does that community go in that direction?
Sure. I think, to be honest, that the pro-Israel community has utterly failed to make the right argument to the LGBT community.
I'm sorry, who has?
The pro-Israel community, the broader pro-Israel community, is making the wrong case for LGBT community in Israel. We make two arguments that are technically correct, but fail to resonate.
Okay.
One is that if you look around the region, you see in Iran, they're hanging gay people. In Egypt, they're imprisoning them. In Gaza, they're pushing them off buildings. Therefore, support Israel, who has a good record on LGBT rights. That's all true, but when we're sitting at the table with these activists, we're not there to talk about that incredible oppression that LGBT people face elsewhere in the Middle East that we should all be concerned about. We're there to talk about Israel. So we're sort of talking about another issue when we're really there to talk about Israel. And I would discourage folks from doing that because it looks like we're trying to change the subject.
Okay, I almost understand, but I don't fully understand. If I'm sitting with somebody in the LGBT community who wants to tell me how bad Israel is, it's the Sharansky model. If you're only saying it about Israel, that's anti-Semitism. If you're sitting with people who are bashing Israel, and you say to them, I understand Israel is just a country. This is not a messianic world. But how do you bash Israel when you don't seem to be bashing communities which, on their face, as you say, it's the reality, are much, much worse? Why wouldn't I want to say that? And why is that, as you say, it's true, but the wrong approach? I don't understand why it's the wrong approach.
It's the wrong approach because we're not putting the emphasis where it belongs. The emphasis needs to be on the activists themselves and not on the state. We're going to have World Pride here in New York City, 50 years since the Stonewall Riots. We started with a riot. We continue with the AIDS crisis.
What's the Stonewall Riots?
The Stonewall Riots were an uprising primarily of LGBTQ and trans people of color that fought after they were kicked out from a police brutality in Stonewall, which is in the Village. And if you think about the history of the community, they had to struggle for their rights. They had to fight for their rights. They went through the AIDS crisis and were ignored for years and years before they finally got recognition. And so when we talk about New York Pride or Tel Aviv Pride, the emphasis has to be on the activists who fought for equality and are still struggling in many ways. And so it's important that we as advocates for Israel talk about those people that did incredible things for their country rather than the state, which sometimes they've had to leverage the democratic values of to fight for their rights. And so when we talk about the state of Israel, it's important that we focus instead on the activists within the state that are fighting for equality.
And who are they and what have they done?
Well, there's a lot of incredible stories that have come out of the community there. And I like to take President Rivlin's approach to the four tribes. He talks about how this is a society incredibly divided. You have the Orthodox, you have the secular, you have the religious nationalists that support a greater Israel, and you have the Arab community. And somehow we have to find a way to get these folks around the table to talk about their collective future. And the most common answer is the IDF. You have people from all four of those tribes that are serving together. But I think a more comprehensive answer is the LGBT cause, because we're everywhere. You have LGBT activists in the heart of Tel Aviv at the Israel LGBT Task Force, the umbrella organization that is lobbying at the Knesset and the Supreme Court. You have in the Orthodox community Bat Kol and Havruta, a gay men's Orthodox organization and a queer women's organization. In the tradition of the Mechitza, there's two organizations, but they work together with Orthodox rabbis, which can be incredibly difficult work to change attitudes in those communities. In the Arab community, as you can guess, it's very difficult, but we work and fund work to make sure that if there's someone in crisis in the West Bank or within the Green Line, like in Nazareth, that there's a place for them to come to in Tel Aviv to have a warm place to sleep, a hot meal, access to social and legal services, to make sure that they're secure. And even in the religious nationalist community, attitudes are changing rapidly, and we shouldn't reject, whatever our politics, a 16-year-old gay kid who's trying to come out that's living in a settlement. Whether you agree with the settlements or not, he didn't choose to grow up there, and we need to make sure that they have the resources as well. So if you think about the fact that we're everywhere, this is an incredibly powerful community, not only to advance equality in the country, but to bring the country together, to find a shared cause, to talk across divides about what kind of future this country is going to build for itself.
Okay, on the one hand, you say it so beautifully, and there's something so attractive about it. It's very hard for me to believe that the LGBT community is going to be a bridge within larger Israeli society, or at the moment, given where we are in time, in any community. Am I wrong?
I hope you're wrong. You know, the Prime Minister just appointed Amir Ohana as the Justice Minister. He's the openly gay member of Knesset in the Likud. And a recent poll came out showing that 78% of Jewish Israelis support same-sex marriage in Israel. 78% of Jewish Israelis are not secular folks living in the heart of Tel Aviv. Even the majority of Likud supports same-sex marriage, which tells us that this is one of the only causes that I can think of that is a unifier in Israeli society. And I think it's one of the only domestic issues that really has any positive momentum today, because we have such a divided country over there that, you know, we have a Knesset that dissolved that's going back to elections. So I think that this is a cause that can give the country hope, not only for its LGBT communities, but the friends and families of LGBT people across the country who care about those community members.
Mm-hmm. The openly gay member of the Knesset is?
Amir Ohana.
Amir.
There's actually 5 of them, but Amir Ohana is the one in the coalition, or the former coalition, who was just appointed the Justice Minister.
Justice Minister.
Correct.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Who's the equivalent in the American Congress?
In the right, we don't have one.
Left?
Left, we have plenty of leaders in the Democratic Party.
Who's the biggest leader that's gay on the Democratic side?
I love Senator Kirsten Sinema from Arizona. She's fabulous. She's a bisexual member of Congress. She was in the House, now in the Senate. Very pro-Israel, very vocal about our issues. And my favorite fact about her is that she leads a Soul Cycle class in D.C. that a lot of my friends in D.C. like to go to.
Yeah. Okay. There's no, at the moment, openly gay member of Congress leading a committee?
Not at the moment. I'd have to check that.
So in some way, Israel is leading the way.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, okay. So when you say these things to members of the larger LGBT community, why don't they say, oh, you're right, there's no reason for us to be anti-Israel, but they are. When you have these discussions, and I don't know the last time you do it, and I don't even know if that's the world you're in. For all I know, it's an unfair question, because your energies and your focus is on the LGBT community in Israel. But if you don't do it yourself, you know what's going on. Why aren't these things persuasive? Why hasn't at least the LGBT community said, just a minute, we don't need to be part of BDS?
So I would say that it is persuasive, and our tagline at A Wider Bridge is equality in Israel, equality for Israel. And while we have a grants program and missions to Israel to lend visibility and growth to the LGBT community there, the other half of our work is to educate the LGBT community about Israel and talk about why it's an important value for American LGBT people. So when we talk about the shared struggles, the same issues that LGBT Israelis have fought for, that American LGBT folks are fighting for today, they see people that are just like them with the same kind of stories. And when the rockets start to fall from Gaza, and when Iran threatens Israel's right to exist, they remember those activists there that are fighting the good fight. And that's when they have the conversations that say, I understand. I understand this is about Jewish safety. I understand that there's an LGBT community here that fears for its life. And that's when we have the opening up process to engage with community members that were previously skeptical. It's about having a stake in this LGBT fight and then understanding that their lives are at stake when we have these existential threats against the state of Israel.
Well, it sounds as if you've made some progress, and I hope it's even more. I'm only telling you how it looks to the outside world. To the outside Jewish world, it looks like the LGBT community is still part of BDS. And we just had a march, as we're sitting here now taping in L'Chaim, we had a Dyke March recently. Mm-hmm. And the Dyke March, the organizers and leaders of that march said to the contingent from Israel, you may not march with a gay pride flag that has the Jewish star on it.
Correct.
Because that represents the state of Israel, and no state which is a brutalizing, occupying state that is violating human rights will be tolerated in our gay Dyke March. And although the issue was fought back and forth, and in the end a compromise was made, and then it was too late to Shabbat, they couldn't march anyway. But here's the Dyke community saying, we're not going to let the Israeli flag, which was on top of it was a Magen David on a gay pride flag.
Yep.
We will not let a gay pride flag march because it represents the state of Israel. So I say to myself, I love what you're saying. I'm only telling you how it looks from the outside and how it is so troubling from the outside.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think the difference between now and 4 years ago was that these issues have always been there. The difference is we're trying to bring these issues to light because these folks have been able to operate and repress those of us that are Jewish and pro-Israel without anyone noticing. And we've been sort of lifting the lid on some of this misbehavior, starting with what happened 4 years ago at the Creating Change conference in Chicago.
What happened?
Where our event with Jerusalem Open House, the organizers of the Jerusalem Pride March, you might remember 4 years ago there was a tragedy where a 15-year-old ally, Shira Bonke, was murdered at the parade. And we wanted to bring the leadership of this organization to Chicago to have them embrace the leadership of this community with the 5,000 people that came to this conference. And instead of having that embrace, 200 angry protesters chanting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, shut the event down, and traumatized from the attack in Jerusalem, we had to shepherd these folks out the back door. Mm-hmm. And so that was really the awakening, I think, that those of us in the American Jewish community saw that, oh, we have a problem in the LGBT community. Mm-hmm. And so I wouldn't say it's gotten worse. I'd say that it's becoming more a part of the major discourse, along with the same issues in the women's movement with Linda Sarsour et al. It's the same thing. We're bringing these issues to light. They've been under the surface, and we haven't been speaking up about this truth. So when it comes to the DC Dyke March, this misbehavior was called out. And while they didn't totally come around and apologize, they've been marginalized in their community. And we were able to get, through our network of alumni that come on our Israel missions, HRC, the Human Rights Campaign, the biggest LGBT nonprofit in America, the 800-pound gorilla, to condemn the Dyke March leadership. And we got the National LGBT Task Force, the organizers of this march in Chicago, to condemn them as well, who did not respond appropriately 4 years ago, who have made some progress along the way.
Well, that is progress. That's
100%.
Real progress. Then I hope you take some pride. You are moving things in the right direction, and you understand at the same time they're not there yet. We're not there yet.
We are not.
With the LGBT community, the wider LGBT community here in America, and it's both troubling and it's so disappointing. Yes.
It's disappointing for sure.
All right. Now talk to me about Israel. I said in the open, are we romanticizing? Because at the moment, there are a lot of comments made about, while there are issues, in the larger sense, Israel is one of the more embracing Western states when it comes to LGBT. To what extent is that true? To what extent is that a romanticized version?
I think that Israel is different than Tel Aviv. Okay, Tel Aviv, the romanticization is 100% correct.
Uh-huh.
I love it. I would say it's the gay mecca, the annual gay, parade.
Have you been there?
I've been every year for the past 6 years.
Is it wonderful?
It's fabulous. There was 250,000 people there. It's the most colorful, joyous thing you'll ever see. And by the way, there are just as many straight people as LGBT people. There's straight families bringing their strollers with their kids to see what this is.
Isn't that wonderful?
It's a beautiful event.
And nobody gets angry at anybody, do they?
No. Well, there's Israelis, so I'm sure they get angry at each other. But it's a beautiful occasion.
Okay, that's Tel Aviv.
That's Tel Aviv.
And your point is?
My point is that no country is an LGBT paradise. And in the same way that our experience here in New York or San Francisco is different from someone's in Oklahoma, someone's experience in Tel Aviv is very different than even Bat Yam. So we have a lot of work to do in other parts of the country, making sure that people are fully accepted there on a social level. On a legal level, Israel has a pretty good report card. I would say it's fairly much on par with the United States, but because they have a different political system, they have some rights we do, and the U.S. has some rights that they don't.
Give us some examples.
So we have same-sex marriage in this country, which is our marquee victory a few years ago. And because of civil marriage in Israel, because you can't go to your city hall and get a marriage certificate, same-sex couples can't get married there. Now, the good news is there was a Supreme Court case in Israel that allows you to go abroad to places like Canada and the U.S., have your marriage certificate, and the state of Israel now has to recognize you. So that's their loophole. But just as when we were fighting for marriage equality here in the U.S. and some states won victories, some people said, you know, I don't want to have to go to California to get married. I want my state of Louisiana to recognize me. I'm going to wait. There's a lot of Israelis saying the same thing. I don't want to have to go to Canada to get my marriage. I want my state to recognize me. I want to have my chuppah in my backyard here in Tel Aviv. So there's hopes for that change to happen.
Okay, let's take that for one moment before we go on to something else. I hope the audience understands your reference because it's very sophisticated. The issue is more than simply the gay community itself. Because in Israel, unless one is married by an accredited Orthodox rabbi, that rabbi is not sanctioned formally by the state of Israel. So it's not about discriminating against gays. It is an issue that affects anyone who is either not in that community, the Orthodox community, or even Orthodox Jews who would rather not be married by a certain list of rabbis. There's a list. If the rabbi is not on the list, the fact that he's Orthodox isn't good enough. And this is a wider problem which spills over onto the LGBT community. And you're making that point to us that it should be seen in a larger context. Am I correct?
And let's also remember that Israel didn't institute this alone. This was from the British Mandate before the establishment of Israel, and the British Mandate got it from the Ottoman Empire. And when the British took over, they said, oh, we'll keep it. So this is something that's been going on a very long time, and it's something that Israeli society, for reform couples, interfaith couples, or couples that just want a civic ceremony,
secular Jews,
it's something that they're going to have to grapple with.
Yes. And it hasn't happened yet. And this is an internal issue that the Israeli people are coping with, dealing with. And it seems to me that it has to organically come out of the Israeli community. You agree?
I agree. And those of us that are following the Israeli elections, you see Avigdor Lieberman's party not want to go into coalition with Bibi. And his community, the Russian community, is also facing similar challenges of marriage recognition.
Correct.
And for the LGBT community, that's both an opportunity and a challenge, because that should be a shared cause. But a lot of these Russian immigrants coming from the former Soviet Union, there's a lot of homophobia there still. And so the LGBT community has a lot of work to do to build inroads with his party leadership and that community. Because if only they could see eye to eye and build coalition with each other, you'd have the two most powerful forces disaffected by this policy to be able to work together towards change. That's something that I'm hoping for.
Okay. Give me another example of a way in which the United States leads and Israel follows when it comes to LGBTQ life.
You know, I think that another way that we've led is just culturally with our media in Hollywood and the strides that we've made over the years in terms of inclusion of openly gay leads. And not only openly gay leads, but openly gay leads played by gay actors. And that's been an incredible shift. Same thing with trans visibility in Hollywood. And that's something that the Israelis have been inspired by and are trying to catch up on now. But I think that that's one way, not only the LGBT community in Israel has looked to us, but Israelis have looked to America and romanticize us. There's a lot of patriotism for the U.S. in Israel, and that extends to the Israeli LGBT community.
What about same-sex adoption?
That's another one. Same-sex couples can legally adopt in Israel, but the status quo is to give preferential treatment to heterosexual couples.
And in America?
In America, it's completely legal.
And there's no preference given to heterosexual couples?
There's no preference given.
Interesting.
So that's another area. Along with surrogacy, same-sex couples can't do surrogacy in Israel. So there's a huge industry developing here in the U.S. where surrogacy is legal for same-sex couples. For same-sex Israeli men, mostly, women have other options, lesbian couples. So you have this whole industry of Israeli men coming to the U.S. to do their surrogacy process. And this Justice Minister, Amir Ohana, he did surrogacy in Portland, Oregon, and brought his kids back to Israel. So that's another area, these issues of family that the country is still working on.
Okay. In that way, America is a bit ahead of Israel.
Correct.
And you suggest there are ways in which Israel is a little bit ahead of the United States.
Definitely.
For example?
One hot topic today is transgender military service in this country. Let's go back to 1993, when we instituted Don't Ask, Don't Tell in this country, where gay and lesbian service members couldn't come out or they would be honorably discharged. Within months of that decision, Israel allowed gays and lesbians to serve in the IDF. Same year, we went like this. And over the course of the 18 years until Don't Ask, Don't Tell was reversed, there have been active combat situations that gays and lesbians serving in the IDF have faced. And if you remember, when we repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell, there was an interim review period at the Pentagon to make sure that this wouldn't affect combat readiness. And what did they do? They turned to the IDF. They turned to generals and openly gay and lesbian service members of the IDF to talk about their active combat situation. Surprise, surprise, what did they find? Non-issue. So as we see this debate heating up again about transgender military service, it's the same story all over again. Israel's had openly transgender military service for almost a decade, and in fact pays for gender confirmation surgery for transgender service members. They will pay for them to become who they are. We are light years behind on that front. And so we are trying to lift up at a wider bridge those Israeli transgender military soldiers and officers to tell their stories here, because there is no institution that I can think of that maintains bipartisan respect in Congress like the IDF. And maybe we can change some attitudes on the right about transgender military service by sharing those stories from the IDF.
That is terrific. Anything else?
Yeah. The other thing is there's another topic right now called the Equality Act, which is essentially a Bill of Rights that was passed by the House for LGBTQ equality. One major component being workplace protection, not being fired for being part of the LGBTQ community, making us a protected class. We wouldn't fire anyone that's LGBTQ at a wider bridge, or we wouldn't have anyone left. In Israel in 1992, they passed workplace protection. So they've had that on the books for 27 years. And so as we're having this debate, our partners in Israel are looking around like, half of them weren't even born that I'm working with when that was passed. It's a very young community. So I think that that's another place where business leaders in Israel who have had this protected class on the books can talk more and more about what an impact having and embracing LGBT people in major tech companies and businesses and banks in Israel, what a positive change that's had for their businesses.
Okay, I want to react to that.
Please.
Because I think the last two things you said, the IDF and the business community, are startlingly revealing about Israeli society and how Israel relates to LGBTQ. And I understand that there are issues for the Orthodox world. And we can discuss that in a moment. There are problems, and they spill over to family life and issues of marriage and issues of adoption. But when I ask you, what is Israeli society? What's their sense? It seems to me that the wider Israeli society, is it's like it's a non-issue, which is where we want to be. I'm sure you'll find another job. But the best thing that could happen to you is a wider bridge isn't relevant anymore because everybody's happy. And there are no issues. That is the best thing that could happen to the LGBT community, even if you meant you had to go out and get another job.
I would love to be put out of business.
I am sure you would, by the way. And my sense is the way you describe Israel, that's why people look to Israel as, in this area, one of the models. And what you want to say is, yeah, more countries should be as accepting and embracing in general. And when I talk to Israelis, to them, they don't understand why it's an issue in the United States. I understand the difference between that and can I get married. I understand the difference between that and me and my partner and I, can we adopt a child or have a child through surrogacy. I understand that. But for the culture as a whole, I believe Tel Aviv does reflect something about Israel as a whole. And I want to know your thoughts.
I think it does, because it represents the entire country. Just like New York is a city of immigrants, Tel Aviv is a city of immigrants, both from around the world and throughout the state of Israel.
Yes.
And I think that there is no more diverse population in terms of where people are from in Israel than the LGBT community living in Tel Aviv. You know, I have friends that grew up in Eilat, I have friends that grew up in the Galilee that are both living there together, and they're sharing stories about their very different upbringings. And I think that's something beautiful, that people are coming together with very different backgrounds.
Am I over-romanticizing by saying that the larger Israeli society, the issue of whether someone is gay or not is just not an issue? And when I say that, by the way, I don't mean every single person, but I do mean society as a whole in general.
I think that Israeli society is ahead of American society in terms of LGBTQ acceptance. And the reason why is because of family. Family is what drives Israeli society. Every Friday night, having a small enough country to be going back to Shabbat dinner. And I think when those parents think about their gay and lesbian and transgender children, they want them to come back for Shabbat dinner. And they want those kids to have grandkids. And I think that it's that sense of family and that sense of continuing the Jewish tradition that ultimately brings the older generations to come around.
And I think that's not true here in America?
I think it's true in America, but we're very spread out. It's normal in this country to move 6,000 miles away. I did. And so it's a different culture. And I think that our Jewish culture that is so prevalent in Israel is really what moves it forward. There's so much between Jewish values and LGBT values that are the same. The story of moving from oppression to freedom, from HIV/AIDS to pride marches, from Egypt to Israel, we celebrate together. And I think that that's something that runs through our veins, both as Jews and as LGBT people.
It's really wonderful. The way you express it, the LGBT community is sort of a microcosm of the entire Israeli, if not Jewish, experience.
Absolutely.
Okay, so what about the LGBT community and the Orthodox in Israel? And we understand that's where there's going to be a problem. But I want you to try to describe it and define it for us.
Sure. So I think that the most prevalent thing that people know is 1822.
Correct.
A man should not lie down with
Book of
another man.
Leviticus.
Exactly. And so one of my Orthodox friends says, all right, then why not do it standing up? Then you're not lying down. So that's their joke to get around the phrase.
It's a joke. It's a joke.
But in all practicality, the work is very complicated. There are traditions, particularly in these closed Heredia communities, that are very hard to change. And the work that we're funding is really just about visibility, about showing that LGBT people aren't all on floats in the Pride Parade in Tel Aviv, but they're also religious LGBT people. Because when the religious Orthodox community sees images of LGBT Israelis, they see images of Tel Aviv Pride. They see images of people in tiny bathing suits, which is fine for me, but not for some other folks. And so they need to see people who have their story, who look like them, who pray like them, that are also gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender. And that's the work of these Orthodox activists, is showing that, hey, we're no different than you. We're religious. We happen to be part of the LGBT community, but we still embrace what it means to be an Orthodox Jew. And that's the story that I think is changing the status quo in Orthodox spaces.
What are you trying, though, to affect? Do you understand why a lovely, committed Orthodox Jew could say to you, I'm happy for you, you live the life any way you want to live, you're a human being. At the same time, understand, you are in direct violation of Torah law, and you shouldn't ask me to do anything that in some way gives that a hechsher, a stamp of approval. And you have to respect my integrity. And my integrity is, I'm a Torah Sinai Jew. I believe the Torah was given literally at Mount Sinai. And it's not just 1822, it's also 2013. And 2013 says if a man lies with another man, they both should be put to death. Homosexuality is a capital crime in the Torah. By the way, Shabbat violation is a capital crime. We do not execute Sabbath violators. Nobody's suggesting we execute homosexuals. But the Orthodox Jew committed to Torah Sinai can say to you, just respect me as much as you want me to respect you. And from my perspective, there is a law given not by a Knesset, but given by the divine at Sinai, which says you should not engage, by the way. The issue is what do you do, not how you feel or not who you are. The Orthodox make a distinction. Their answer is be gay, just don't engage in homosexual sex. But whatever they say is, from their perspective, a function of their real commitment. And I have to tell you that I'm so sympathetic to virtually everything you say. There's one word you use, and it's not you, that's used in the discussion that rankles me. It's not homophobia. It's not that an Orthodox Jew who's committed to halakha is afraid of the homosexual. I would like to believe that even Orthodox Jews understand it's not a disease, it's not catching, it's not something you can be taught. You either are or you're not. And from my perspective, as a Jew who does not accept Torah Sinai, and I take a more Heschelian approach, that the Torah is the Jewish people's response to the experience we have of the divine. That there is a divine that somehow places a demand upon us, but that demand is worked out by human beings. And the Jewish tradition is how the Jewish people have worked out our unique, wondrous, exhilarating, uplifting embrace of life in our Torah. But because I don't believe it's Torah Sinai literally, I can say the Jewish tradition has been constantly evolving. We understand more about human nature, and as we understand more about human nature, we understand more about what we should or should not do and be. So, yes, the Torah says, a man shall not lie with another man, and if he does, he's executed. And that's because at one point it was thought to be a moral choice. If we understand it's not a choice, the Jewish tradition says explicitly, if it's not a choice, you cannot be punished for it. There should be no punishment. It should be accepted as another creation of the divine. Once that happens, it changes one's whole approach. That's my approach. If one, however, doesn't have my approach, and one believes it's from Sinai, and here's what it says, then it's not about my being homophobic. I'm trying to be a halachic Jew. I'm trying to be a Jew authentically responsive to the God of this universe. Please understand that from my perspective, you are violating Torah law as well as halakha, and therefore don't ask me to create a social norm which accepts that as a simple alternative. And that's the dilemma between being a secular or liberal Jew and being a either halachic or even more an ultra-Orthodox Jew. And I'm only now saying to you, if a Jew were able to articulate it as I did, what would your response be? Would you be understanding of that Jewish approach?
I would be empathetic to their faith. And you always need to come at these conversations from a place of empathy. You know, we're so bad these days in polarized society at seeing things from other people's perspectives.
Meaning we don't do it well.
We don't do it well
Right.
at all. So the first thing is empathy. Look, we all have trouble following 613 mitzvot all the time. And as a secular Reform Jew, I probably am not consistent with more than a few, which is why I think it's so important that the folks that are from the LGBT Orthodox community are the voices that we lift up for this conversation. And what some of them would tell me is, we break a lot more mitzvot not keeping Shabbat than we do being LGBT.
Why is that relevant? By the way, it reminds me of your discussion of what you don't say to the LGBT, the secular, larger LGBT community. It's interesting. It may even be right. It's not to the point.
So what our friends in the community would say is that, would you rather have a son or daughter that doesn't practice Shabbat, or would you rather have a son or daughter that's part of the community?
That's a false dichotomy. There's no either or. If I'm an Orthodox Jew, I want a child to follow Shabbat and also not be gay. What's hard to that? I'm only saying to you, although it is not my approach, and I believe, incidentally, it's not even those now more and more within the modern Orthodox community.
Correct.
And we have Orthodox rabbis who now are openly gay. And they're courageous, good for them, let's see where it goes. But I don't trivialize, nor do I want to be condescending to the Orthodox Jew who says, I just can't. And I want to know whether you, as a leader of Wider Bridge, can say, you know, and that's a real problem that we haven't figured out yet how to deal with. They, meaning the Orthodox community that feels that way, ultimately, from within their ranks, there has to be a sea change. But it can't be a sea change that comes from a Wider Bridge.
No, and I think that these things happen in baby steps.
Yes.
And what I would say to someone is, fine, we disagree. We can respectfully disagree with each other. But there are people in your community, there are young people, older people in your community that are in pain, that need support, that are struggling with who they are, that unfortunately are attempting suicide. And while you may not agree with their choice to come out, to want to have this part of their identity, we need to care for our children. And so we need to find ways to support them. And that's where I think that our folks have the most success starting the conversation, is caring for folks in their communities. And if we can start from that point of empathy, of not agreeing or not understanding those decisions, but caring about our collective community and our children and our future, then we can start to find ways to support them. And that leads to more opening and more discussions, and that can change hearts and minds.
Oh, I think that's beautifully said. Amen v'amen. All right, so here you are, you're talking to America. Primarily American Jews. We have many, many, many people who are not Jewish. And we don't only have people living in LA and New York watching us. You're speaking to people all across America. As you deal with the experience in Israel, what is it that what's your message, the bottom line message you wish that all Jews, wherever they live, really understood better about the LGBT experience and what you hope for in the near future? And I'm going to ask you to talk to them. That's them right there.
Sure. So, you know, this is a struggle that goes back before Stonewall. We've always been around. We always will be around. And we want to be free, just like the Jewish people. Whether it's being kicked out of the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, the Spaniards, the LGBT community, we have the same experience. We've gone through oppression. We've been denied who we are, the chance to be free. And it's a Jewish value to support this community. Whether it's in Israel or here in the United States, we have the same story. And that's why I think I'm so lucky to be an LGBT Jew. I get to tell the story twice.
You are fabulous. Thank you for being.
Thank you so much.
You have to promise me to come again and keep us abreast of the story and the journey and where there's progress. Kol tuv v'hatzlacha.
Toda. Thank you.
Fabulous. Tyler Ty Gregory, Executive Secretary of A Wider Bridge, an LGBTQ organization seeking to advance equality for the gay community of Israel. And really, it's a wider effort that not only affects LGBTQ throughout the world, but really, who are the Jewish people? And who are we as an American society? And what do we want to create for ourselves and our children? And, Ty's discussion of, in the end, what you want to be is as lovely a person as you can be to the people you love and the people you know, especially members of your family. As always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have to any of the ideas expressed on this edition of L'chaim. Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook page, or tweet me. I look forward to hearing from many of you. And remember, you can now take L'chaim with you wherever you go as a L'chaim podcast, wherever you listen to your podcasts. And so until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'chaim, my friends, to life.
Jewish education in media.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please, indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.